The Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verses 1 through 11. After this the Lord appointed 70 others and sent them on ahead of him in pairs to every town and place where he himself intended to go. He said to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the labourers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out labourers into his harvest. Go on your way. See, I am sending you out like lambs into the midst of wolves. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. And whichever house you enter, first say, 'Peace to this house.' And if anyone is there who shares in peace, your peace will rest on that person. But if not, it will return to you. Remain in the same house, eating and drinking whatever they provide, for the labourer deserves to be paid. Do not move about from house to house. Whenever you enter a town and its people welcome you, eat what is set before you, cure the sick who are there, and say to them, 'The kingdom of God has come near to you.' But whenever you enter a town and they do not welcome you, go out into its streets and say, 'Even the dust of your town that clings to your feet, we wipe it off in protest against you. Yet know this, the kingdom of God has come near.'" I've been thinking quite a lot recently about what it means to be a Christian, and what mission means in a world where the instinctive church activity of gathering has become virtual. Not virtual as in imaginary, but in developing connectedness by way of telephones, computers, cameras and microphones, letters and text messages. And I believe I'm in safe territory in saying that it hasn't been entirely comfortable. I've been reflecting on both some of the key events of the past month that have dominated the media, and have been comparing and contrasting what we expect Christians to do, how to behave, how we compare that today with those very first disciples. We heard in our Gospel reading just now of Jesus sending out 70 missionaries to the places he intended to visit. Firstly, he sent them as pairs, not as a large group, and he instructs them to travel without money, without possessions, even without sandals. So I'd like to ask to imagine what that must have been like, to travel for days to unknown places with nothing but the clothes upon your back. It made those first missionaries extremely vulnerable. And reflecting upon that vulnerability led me to remember some research undertaken by a professor of sociology about 15 years ago. This professor interviewed thousands of people exploring that theme of vulnerability, and her results were surprising. She discovered that out of vulnerability came a series of negative emotions: shame, fear, and a struggle for self-worth. Being vulnerable can bring out the worst in us. She further discovered that there were two classes of people: those who hid and numbed their sense of vulnerability, and those that accepted and surrendered to it. And this latter group were very different. They were more positive and they were happy. She described them as being wholesome and not broken. Their vulnerability had become the birthplace of joy, of creativity, of belonging, and of love. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense. You cannot really love or be loved if you don't first take the risk of being hurt. You have to make yourself vulnerable and accept the risk of rejection, and accept that risk of failure. And if you numb your vulnerability, you shield yourself from failure. You shield yourself from fear, from shame, from having to address your issues of self-esteem and feelings of worthlessness. But you also numb yourself from joy, from community, and from love. Making yourself vulnerable exposes you, but it also opens the door to joy and contentment. And I really think that Jesus understood that. Vulnerability has risks, but it also creates opportunities. In recent weeks I have watched, perhaps with dismay, as people have developed genuine outrage at how others have behaved, how others have broken a social convention that we thought we understood, and out has poured indignation and anger and spite. But I wonder, how much of our collective anger is actually masking our own sense of fear? How much of it is actually an expression of our own sense of vulnerability? How much of it is us trying to numb our own fears and uncertainties about how the world around us is changing, and how we feel insecure about our place within it? I wonder, and suspect that when we dig down deep, where the dirtier parts of us that we don't show off at parties, where those parts of us lurk, some of our angst is because we are a little afraid, a little uncomfortable, a little uncertain. And I wonder, how might we use that vulnerability differently? How might we use that vulnerability to grow, to dance to a new beat, to find a new love and contentment, to be wholesome, and to grow through the joy and the love of Christ in the vulnerability that he encourages us, like those first missionaries, to embrace and take into our hearts.